there's a spectrum that's going to determine your legacy as a leader. In this video, I'm going to show how your lead style determines how your team operates. There's a trap that many new managers fall into, and that is, as you go from being a doer to being a leader, many people struggle with the change of identity. And so with a doer's mindset, they still think it's about them. It's about their strategies. It's about their ideas. It's about how good they are at motivating people. And all of these things that it's very much centered on them as the leader. This can lead to a lot of problems in your leadership that are really hard to fix later on. So this is the leadership spectrum that I'm talking about. As I see it, you've got Abraham Lincoln on one side and Donald Trump on the other side, and at the extreme polarities of this spectrum. If you've been following, you'll have seen all of this model. If you haven't, click the link in the description so that you can get all of them. So if we recap, the key to your success as a leader is in the operating frame that you create. And the way that you create that operating frame, so there's 3 levers, which are the climate that the team operate in. This is how much trust, how much respect, how much confidence you and the team have in each other. This will determine to a large extent how well you communicate. If communication's flowing, if you all know where everyone is, then you have an awareness that you're able to function as a team. This and your stewardship of what values that you make a stand for, what your expectations and the performance that you demand are what drives the culture. So you create this operating frame which creates the culture. It's a culture that drives performance, and the performance of the team is ultimately what becomes your legacy as a leader. Now, the reason that leadership is so difficult, the reason it's so challenging and so many people struggle, is because you'll see that all of those pillars rest on your foundations as a leader. And today what we want to talk about is how your foundations as a leader is either going to make or break the team. So leaders have an enormous impact. There's a quote that people don't leave a bad job, they leave a bad leader. So some leaders are what I would call dividers and some are unifiers. So we'll get into the mindset and the operating frame of a divider. If we look at some examples, Julius Caesar split Rome in 2. He didn't want to share leadership, and he brought a civil war to Rome when he crossed the Rubicon in order to take power. Whereas the corollary to that is Marcus Aurelius. The first thing he did on becoming emperor was to appoint his brother as co-emperor. Then we have Joseph Stalin, one of the leaders that has killed more of his own people than anyone else. We can contrast him with someone like Kemal Ataturk, who is known as the father of Turkey because he basically generated the idea of what is Turkey. And then in more recent times, we've got Vladimir Putin, like Stalin, who doesn't allow anyone to contradict him. And then we have Nelson Mandela, who again was someone who brought South Africa together after apartheid. Essentially what dividers do is they take the whole of who's in their team or who's in a nation, and what they do is they say that these are good and these are on the in team and these are bad and we need to get rid of these. Anyone who disagrees, anyone who challenges, anyone who doesn't fit into their mold is on the outside. What unifiers do is they enlarge the scope of what they're envisioned. Rather than being tribal, dividing teams into ins and outs, they create the frame that is inclusive and works for everyone. So they try and bring everyone together under the same umbrella. And so they make the umbrella wider and less tribal than a divide. When we look at the operating frame of Abraham Lincoln and Donald Trump, we can see from their words a very different style of leadership. What I've tried to get here is a few quotes that sum up their style of leadership on similar issues. Donald Trump is very divisive and people are for me and they're either losers or they're winners. Whereas Abraham Lincoln is, I don't like that man, I must get to know him better. Trump is a businessman who makes deals wherever he goes. Whereas Abraham Lincoln, his mindset is more about aligning with nature. A lot of the quotes from Donald Trump are about how wonderful his temperament is, leadership, how he's an incredible businessman, went to a great school, great student, built an incredible company, the best-selling business book of all time, according to himself. Whereas Abraham Lincoln was much more humble. It was less about him and more about what he felt was the right thing for the good of everyone. So these quotes sum up a different mindset and a different view of leadership. what I want to show is they come from the leader's style, but they come from the way that the leader thinks about themselves, the way that they think about other people, and the way that they think about what they're going to do together. Breaking it down, that dividers are very much about my way. So Stalin, Trump, Putin, very much about my ideology, my power. I'm the authority. They're authoritarian leaders. Unifiers are about our way. They're much more open to have discussions and work together to find a strategy forward. Dividers want to be right or believe they are right, and unifiers want to get it right. What this means is that if you think that you are right, you're not very receptive and open to other feedback, whereas a unifier has a much more open mind and they're willing to discuss and understand different perspectives. Dividers are looking for power. They want the controls to be able to implement their idea because they're certain what they're doing is right. Unifiers are looking for what's the reality of the situation. So I call that the truth, as in what's the lay of the land? Let's understand, let's work together and strategize to find the best way of working. When dividers are challenged, they demonize. We can see this with Trump at the moment, that he bars certain members of the press. Anyone who challenge any media organization who challenges him become insulted. They're losers, they're not very good, whatever it is. Whereas when you look at Barack Obama, when he was heckled, he was, okay, let's talk about this. Unifiers tend to be much more willing to empathize, to understand the people that challenge them. Dividers believe that they are the source because they believe that they're right. They believe they're the source of ideas. And therefore, if they found to be wrong or they make a mistake, there's a intense feeling of shame. Whereas unifiers, because they're not operating on the basis that they're perfect, that they know everything, they're much more willing to be vulnerable and accept mistakes. So dividers tend to work on bravado. So if you look at Donald Trump, he's full of bravado, that this is the way, I'm so great, this is going to be the greatest, this is tremendous. Whereas unifiers have the bravery to admit that they don't know what they're doing, to admit that they don't know if it's going to work, but they're just doing their best. So the outcome of this is that dividers are very competitive, because if you are the one who's right, if it's your way, then you are naturally threatened by anyone who's challenging that. If you feel driven by shame, you are going to demonize people. And so there's a very competitive mindset behind dividers, whereas unifiers have a much more collaborative mindset because they're not the source of wisdom. Unifiers tend to be much more collaborative because they're much more open-minded, because they're not speaking truth, they're seeking truth. All of this impacts the way that they interact with their team. It therefore impacts the climate of how much trust, how much openness, how much respect, how much confidence we have in each other. Communication is much more closed with dividers because you're not going to speak up if you're going to be demonized, if you're going to be punished. If there isn't that psychological safety there, then people don't speak up. And we miss things because people are afraid to say anything contradictory. And so we have a very limited perspective. Unifiers, because they create this mutual trust and respect and confidence, tend to have much more open communication because there is more psychological safety. And so the culture is more organic, that people have bought into because they feel a part of it, whereas dividers tend to operate a lot from fear. So ultimately what this means is that unifiers tend to expand and they grow their perspective because they're taking in diverse views. They're being challenged. They're having the mistakes that they make tend to be caught in communication because they are able to have open conflict. Whereas dividers exclude anyone who threatens them. They exclude anyone who disagrees with them. They exclude anyone who's not like them. And what happens is you then have this very tight-knit group. But then as soon as you've got rid of those people that you disagree with or have demonized, what you then get is a new group. You have to replace the people who weren't so good, who the out group. And so you have a perspective that shrinks. This isn't just groupthink, but it's a mentality of where you have a culture of fear. The ideas of the most powerful tend to survive, whether they're the best or not. And so the longer a divider is in leadership, the less people they trust, the less open communication that they have, the less trust, the less respect that they have. And the culture tends to veer towards the toxic, and the culture tends not to be one of performance, but of obedience.